As a kid, at the end of a long day, which usually consisted of school, homework, dinner, maybe a bit of video game time, how did you end your day? Did you plop in front of the TV? Probably, right? Well, if you grew up in the 90s and Nickelodeon was one of the only channels you watched, you may recall a block of programming that came on right around bedtime and was made up of nothing but old shows. Like really old shows. Like the shows that were so old your parents probably watched them as a kid. Well, that, my friends, was what was affectionately known as Nick at Night. And what better way to wrap up an entire month dedicated to that Big Orange Splat than to talk about the shows that were on TV when you were just about to hit the hay. The shows of yesteryear making a comeback on the airwaves and giving your parents a bit of nostalgia that you might be feeling right now as you listen to this podcast. So nestle down, grab the clicker, and kick your feet up in your favorite lazy boy as Beth and I turn back the clock a few decades to simpler times. It's part 4 and the final part of the New Year's Nonstop Nickelodeon Extravaganza. It's Nick at Night on Generation S. Generation S. Hey there, and welcome back to Generation S. It's a podcast about growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. I'm Dan Kemp, joined by my co-host today, the lovely Miss Elizabeth Kemp. That's my wife, Beth. Beth, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am great, and welcome back to the show. Happy New Year, because the last episode we did together was New Year's Eve.
Oh, yes, yes.
And so we are back at it again, this time with the final part of our 4-part series for the New Year's Nonstop Nickelodeon Extravaganza. Now, you were not on any of the other Nickelodeon episodes.
No.
But you watched Nickelodeon as a kid.
Of course.
Part of your life, part of a lot of our lives. But you are going to help me out today with kind of the final rung. What I wanted to do with this whole series was start with essentially childhood and work our way up into, teenage years, young adulthood, because we started off with Nicktoons. Then we moved on to game shows and sports. Then we moved on to SNICK, so Saturday Night Nickelodeon. And we are wrapping up with Nick at Night. Now, when I say Nick at Night, I'm talking about Nick at Night in the mid-90s, which is when I watched it, right? Is that when you watched it too?
Yep.
Yeah. So it was really old shows that were on in like the 50s, the 60s, maybe the 70s.
Yep.
And so that's kind of where we're going to finish things up here is the older kids block, because this stuff came on late. What was it, 9 o'clock that it would come on?
Yeah, 9 o'clock, I think was.
And so I know as a little kid, I was not allowed to stay up to watch this stuff. I probably was, if I were to venture a guess, like 8 or 9 when I was first allowed to start staying up a little later, and definitely would have Nick at Night as part of my nightly routine. What about you?
Yeah, I don't remember my exact age. I do remember it was exciting when I was allowed to watch it because it was like, oh wow, you get to stay up late. Yeah. So that part I remember. As far as an exact, probably the same age. I
was gonna say, so like my routine was, you had Scooby-Doo. I'd watch Scooby-Doo on Cartoon Network, and that was about 8:30. Then my mom was very generous to let me stay up and watch the first half hour, sometimes even hour of the Nick at Night programming block. So we'll get into the shows that we watched. I don't want to talk about them right now because I do want to give them some good attention here. But what were your thoughts? The whole idea was, again, it was older shows that our parents would have watched as kids, right? That was the idea. How did you feel about like black and white TV shows back then?
Well, I was slightly annoyed, obviously, just because, we had color, and I was like, what, why? Why? But no, it was, once you get past that, it's fun. It's silly, goofy things, Yeah. I did my first television in my room actually was black and white, like that's all it could receive, like not
old school.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I was just happy to have a TV in my room. So honestly, that aspect I got over really fast.
Yeah.
At first I was maybe annoyed, but like I said, I was like, whoa, I have a TV in my room. And so I watched like regular programming in black and white because I had no other choice.
So honestly, if you were to compare that to the stuff from like old school Nick at Night, I mean, we're on the even playing field at that point then.
Yeah. 6 to 1. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. See, I liked black and white. I thought it was kind of cool. I think, like you said, it was a little jarring at first. And I always watched it in like the downstairs basement TV. I didn't have a TV in my room until I got older. And so for me, it was older shows, but I think when I first started watching it, like, and I gave it an actual chance, I'm like, these are really good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think because of that, you know, over 25 years ago, I have an appreciation for how television's really evolved. And I think what's really cool about Nick at Nite, at least when it was on when we were kids, is that you got exposure to shows that your parents watched, and you were watching them in the same way they would have watched them. Maybe not the same time of day, but they're watching them on an old box TV, right? That was the whole idea, is that you're experiencing these shows in the same way they did, whereas now we could show our kids the Munsters or whatever,
on a streaming platform,
and it's going to be on an iPhone, right? And that's not the same thing.
That
again, you know, I don't want to toot the horn of our Generation S, but we did get to grow up with old stuff and still appreciate new stuff. And I don't know, it's just, I'm biased toward our generation, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, why don't we get into a few of the shows? We're not going to go through all the shows because there's been a ton over the years. Well, before we do, just again, as kind of a rehash of Nick at Nite and what it was, in case you didn't watch it. It was a block of programming that went starting at 9 o'clock and went all night, actually, I believe, until about 6:30 in the morning. And they would just air old TV shows that would have been on in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. And as the years progressed, they would start putting somewhat newer content on there. So, like, for example, I remember in like the early 2000s, if I was channel surfing and I saw Nick at Nite, it would be like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, which wasn't that old at the time, right? It was only about 5 or 6 years old. I know, like, even later they would put like Full House episodes on there.
Seinfeld was on there.
Seinfeld. I know Friends is on there right now. I just saw that. So, but when we were watching it, it was truly shows that, you know, were decades behind. So it was really kind of a glimpse into the past. So let's kind of just talk about a few here that were some of our favorites and just kind of our thoughts and whatnot. So, before we got on here and started recording, I did ask you, so give me your top five shows. Just, you know what? List them out real quick. What were your top 5? Do you remember?
So it was, let's see, the Munsters, I Dream of Jeannie, I Love Lucy. Oh my gosh, I had them. Happy Days, and I'm blanking on the 5th one. I'm blanking on what I said.
Do you want to tell you what you told me?
Yeah, what did I tell you? It
was Bewitched.
Bewitched. Oh, yes. How could I have forgotten that one? That one was actually probably my favorite one.
Okay. So, and we'll talk about that. So, for me, my top 5, actually very similar to yours. So, basically the same list, except we're going to swap out Happy Days for the Brady Bunch.
Okay.
Because I watched the Munsters. That was the first Nick at Nite show I ever watched. And so that was the one that led in from Scooby-Doo for me. Then you had I Love Lucy. You had I Dream of Jeannie. You had Bewitched. And for me, once again, the Brady Bunch. So those were my 5. Let's talk about them. So let's start with the Munsters because that came on first. I mean, the thing with the Munsters was that it almost, if at first glance, you'd think you were watching a spinoff of the Addams Family, when in fact, I believe it came out before the Addams Family.
Don't quiz me on that one. I don't know, but yes, they're very, very similar. And half of my childhood, I think I just lumped them all together.
Yeah, just
to be honest,
weird,
I had no idea.
people.
I was like, oh, it's a big giant Frankenstein man.
Yeah. So you like the Munsters?
Frankenstein
then?
monster man. Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah, I loved it.
Yeah. What was the appeal for you?
I just thought it was hilarious. Where they had, you know, this family of like, I mean, for better or lack of better term, freaks. That are living in this house, you know, and then they have, what was it, the niece or the cousin or whatever that had lived with them.
Yep.
I'm blanking on her name. Marilyn.
Yep.
There it is. Yeah. And like how it was funny because she was always like, felt like the outcast or she was ugly or, you know, like they would make comments and things like that.
But she's beautiful.
She was absolutely gorgeous. But yeah, because, you know, and it was just kind of funny because, you know, you don't see that, you know.
I think what was interesting, again, going back to that Munsters Addams Family comparison, was that the Munsters, they were basically the Universal movie monsters, right? That was what they're all based off of. And they were living in an old creepy house, but they were, you know, when you actually got to know them, a pretty normal suburban family of the time.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, but the Addams Family was almost the opposite. So I know they're compared a lot, but the Addams Family were, human characters that, were they were normal. They were weird. Maybe they dressed funny or whatever, but they were human beings. They weren't monsters, and they still lived in a weird house, but they acted really weird and like dark. And it was, again, it was the opposite. You had normal looking people acting very dark, and then you had the movie monsters acting like every good old fashioned suburban family.
Yeah.
So it was really kind of a stark contrast. And honestly, I think between the two, I prefer the Munsters. I love the Addams Family movies, but just if you were to compare the old show, like the black and white Addams Family show, to the Munsters, to me, Munsters wins out every time. Love that show.
Well, yeah, it's wholesome. Like every
it is. Yeah,
each episode, there was some kind of wholesome, thing that they were trying to solve or do.
I mean, the plot points were, other than a few maybe kind of weird exceptions, they were straight out of like a Leave It to Beaver.
Yeah. It was very 50s.
It was. And so I loved it. I thought it was great. I love the act. Fred Gwynn, Herman Munster.
Yes.
He went on to play a lot of characters that I love in movies.
That is just a random side note. This is just something that is funny. I used to have these pair of boots, very thick soled black boots.
Okay.
That my friends would call my Eddie Munster boots.
Eddie Munster.
Or not Eddie. I'm sorry.
Herman
Munster.
Yeah.
Why did I say Eddie? Herman Munster boots. Just, I would wear them and they were like, we should hear you clomping down the hall from a mile away. And I thought they were platform, just thick black.
Oh, yeah.
Boots. They were amazing. Sorry, but they were my Herman Munster boots.
Well, those were very fashionable back then.
Oh, they were. I still got
in
made
some
fun
circles.
of. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I was made fun of for it, but I wore them very proudly. But anyway, I should have.
Because he did. That. He would wear those giant platformy boots. So he was already a pretty tall guy, but those boots put him probably close to 7 foot, I would think.
Yeah.
He was pretty huge. But no, man, he was in My Cousin Vinny. Did you ever see that movie?
Yep.
Love that movie. He was the judge in that one. He was, I forget. Oh, Judd Travers was his name in Pet Sematary. But I don't think you've seen Pet Sematary.
Oh, God, no, I can't.
You won't watch it.
I refuse.
He does a great job, by the way.
I'm sure, but I flat out refuse.
So he was great. Lily Munster, Yvonne DiCarlo was her name.
Mm-hmm.
I've never really seen her in anything else. I just know her from the Munsters. I do remember having like the biggest crush on her because she was beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah,
in a very kind of, I think, honestly,
goth.
She was maybe my goth awakening phase where I was like, hey, goth chicks. All right.
So what's that, buddy?
And then you had Grandpa, who I think you just called Grandpa, but he played by Al Lewis.
He was my favorite, I think, of all the characters. I don't know why, but he was always there's this old dude up to no good. And he didn't listen to anybody. Like he lived by his own just compass of whatever. And he did.
Well, he was like an inventor.
Yeah, he did whatever the hell he wanted in that basement. And it was amazing.
It was living rent free down there.
Yeah.
Was that his house? I maybe not. I don't think it was his house. Maybe, I'm trying to think. Was he freeloading off of his kids, or was it vice versa?
I always assumed he moved in with them, but
yeah.
I don't know. I don't have any good actual intel on that. So.
I mean, it's
an assumption.
It would make sense. So you had Marilyn as well. Marilyn Munster was the cousin who, for some reason, I don't think we know why. She's living with her aunt and uncle and her cousin. And she looks like Marilyn Monroe, and I'm wondering if that's why they called her Marilyn.
Why that would be my guess.
Because she was just this blonde bombshell, very sweet girl, would always bring boys home, and they always found her, they thought she was hot, and then she would say, hey, why don't you meet my folks? And of course they all run away, and she's like, what is it with me? Guys just don't like me. And they're like, well, Marilyn, if you weren't so homely looking.
Marilyn, you're just so homely. Yeah.
Yeah. So she was great. I still think Lily's hotter. That's just me.
Oh my. Okay.
I'm just saying.
That's me.
And then of course we have Eddie Munster, who is their only child, technically speaking. And it's funny, for the longest time, based on the way he looked, I thought he was like a little mini vampire, but I was wrong. Do you know what he's supposed to be?
Shoot, I thought he was a vampire.
He's not a vampire, he's a werewolf.
Oh, dang.
Yeah, because I remember there's a few episodes where he's like howling at the moon.
Oh, that's
but he's got that widow's peak haircut, so you assume it's like a Dracula type thing.
Yeah.
But no, he is supposed to be a werewolf. So you've got
a wereboy.
A wereboy, I guess, or a boy. Well, I don't know. Anyway, a young werewolf. So you've got Frankenstein's monster. You've got the Bride of Frankenstein. You've got, is she Bride of Frankenstein? I'm trying to think of what Lily would have been her parallel was. Because Herman's obvious. You got Grandpa, who's Dracula's the vampire. Eddie's the Wolfman in boy form. What would Lily have been, though? I mean, my first thought was Bride of Frankenstein because of the whole white streak in the hair. But she's not a Frankenstein. She's supposed to be a vampire. So I don't know if she's maybe like kind of a amalgamation. Is that the word of like multiple characters?
With these SAT words.
You like that? Yeah, man. I took the SATs back in the day twice. No, I just took them once actually. So fantastic show. I'm already going to tell you, I think it's probably my favorite show on this list. Spoiler alert. I do love the other shows that we're going to get to, but the Munsters to me, like it was on Netflix until not too long ago, and I would pop it on because it was like a comfort food show for me where you could pop it on and just kind of fall asleep.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Because I'd seen so many of the episodes so many times. So just and there was only 2 seasons apparently.
Wow.
So there's less than 50 episodes.
I guess I recycled those more than I thought.
You did. Well, that's the thing is a lot of our shows that we watched, even like shows that were modern for us, they weren't necessarily around very long. Like Doug Funny, I think was only around for 2 or 3 seasons.
Huh.
Yeah. See? So fun fact. All right. So that's the Munsters. Let's go ahead and talk about. So the next one that would come on for me was I Dream of Jeannie. So let's talk about that next. You actually told me a little fun factoid about that a few days ago, and I was kind of hoping you'd share it on the podcast.
Oh, yeah. So since she's a genie, she's not a human. She is not supposed to have a belly button. So if you look, they do try to. There's people have like put on the internet and all that since all the times that they screwed up and you could see it, but she's not supposed to have a belly button because she's a genie. She's not a human.
But she looks human otherwise. So why not just say if she's making herself look human, she gave herself a belly button?
I don't know. It was just a plot point for them. They just they sat down at the table, a bunch of old white dudes writing this, I'm sure.
Smoking their cigarettes, chain smoking. And
let's make this woman not have a belly button.
Yeah, Shay, that's going to give it all away, Shay.
Probably. I don't know. I wasn't there. But fun fact.
So I Dream of Jeannie. I'll take this one on the plot. So we have an astronaut named Tony Nelson.
Yeah,
I forget the actor's name. I know that the actor went on to play in. He was JR in Dallas, but I don't remember his name. It's not really that important. But anyway, he was an astronaut and he crash landed and was. You know what? Actually, I'm kind of blanking on the plot. I remember he basically encounters the genie bottle and meets Jeannie, who falls in love with him and basically lives with him as his, I don't want to say his slave because that has negative connotations, but she called him master. So I don't know.
I think they did him like it was. I mean, yes, no, that's
basically
frowned upon, but I think that was the whole.
I think he got a lot more than 3 wishes. Is all I'm going to say.
Yeah, like she was his.
She was his slave. Okay, we'll just say it.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I just unless we can come up with a better word throughout this conversation, we're going to stick with that for right now. Anyway, the point being, she basically did anything and everything for him. She worshipped the ground he walked on.
Yes,
she was totally in love with him. And what's funny is he wasn't feeling it, right? I mean, I think he like sort of had feelings for her, but would always shun her for human people. And she didn't like that. She would get very jealous sometimes if he brought dates home or stuff like that. She would basically try to sabotage things. And she got very emotional. Yeah, she got possessive. She got emotional.
Well, here, I'm sorry. I just found, I guess the reason for the belly button is that back at that time, the midriff was allowed. But the second you showed a belly button, you were slapped with fines.
Oh, okay.
So there was an actual reason for it. I'm sorry. I was curious as to why.
So the whole thing about Jeannie's not having belly buttons in that was.
So no, I get. Well, that's how they would.
Ah, okay.
Because I think it was brought up in the show.
Oh, okay.
At some point, but the reason was that these guys didn't want to pay the fine, the FCC fines.
Well, back then, man, yeah. I mean, you think about it. Her outfit in general, even for the '60s, was pretty racy, right? It showed a lot of skin.
Yeah. So it said that the midriff, quote unquote, was allowed, but apparently the belly button was that was a no-fly zone.
That's where they draw the line.
That was a no-fly zone for them.
So, I mean, what were your thoughts on Jeannie as a whole? Like, is it a one that you truly liked, or?
So I did enjoy the show. I don't know. Looking back on it now, there's certain shows that you're like, man, that did not age well.
Yeah.
And that's definitely one of them. Yeah.
Like going back to if you were to go back to the Munsters, they could pretty easily reboot that and, or I mean, hell, even have like a shot for shot remake and it wouldn't really ruffle any feathers. It was a pretty wholesome, straightforward show. I Dream of Jeannie, I agree. I think there was a lot of misogyny there.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the one thing I feel like they might be able to do would be like a gender reversal of I Dream of Jeannie, where you had the genie be a dude, and then it's like a female astronaut or whatever, whatever, a lawyer, who knows, probably a lawyer in this day and age. But you have like a strong female character who is being pined after by this male genie.
Yeah.
Or would that might actually cause some controversy anyway.
Yeah, no,
Never
it just
mind.
didn't age well.
Yeah.
Just in general.
By the way, for those who are actually curious as to who played Tony Nelson, Larry Hagman was the actor's name. Again, I don't think anybody cares, but he also played JR in Dallas, and it was bothering me, so I had to look it up while you were talking. So,
no one cares. No.
So, I Dream of Jeannie, a good show. I would say, yeah, on the scale of wine to milk, it's closer to milk when it comes to aging. So,
yeah, I'd have to agree with you on that one.
All right, well, listen, let's go ahead and look at our next one then. Here, for me, it's either going to be I Love Lucy or Bewitched. I kind of lump them together in terms of
what.
Yeah, and well, just in terms of when they came on TV.
Oh, well, maybe the programming time.
Yeah, which one do you want to talk about next?
Either one. I mean, Bewitched is fine.
Let's talk Bewitched.
That was probably, honestly, my favorite, because she was like so. I guess she was like so powerful. Like she was so cool. Like she had, the husband and a kid, and she like had this magic, and she would do all these things, and like Dick Van Dyke was kind of a
Dick Van Dyke,
or not Dick Van Dyke.
It was Larry Tate.
No,
was the name of the actor.
Well, the dude.
Is it Darren?
Darren, yeah. Who was Darren?
I think Darren was the name of the husband. Yeah, he was the actor's name or the character's name.
No, what was his name? Well, what was his name?
Dick York was the name of
Dick
the
York.
actor.
What did I say? I knew it was Dick something.
Well, that's
not
the
Van
actor.
Dyke.
No,
sorry.
Yeah, but Darren was the name of the character.
Yeah, Darren. So anyway, so he was kind of a bumbling whatever.
He was just like a
goofy dude,
a businessman.
Yeah, but
whatever.
he was kind of goofy when it came to just like whatever. And she was just kind of the head of that household and whatever. And then the mom was always kind of funny.
She hated him. She was,
Oh, I know. It was hilarious because they didn't like each other. And I thought that was funny.
But I think what's really cool is, again, almost the opposite of and again, it's funny because I would kind of like, to me, I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched were very similar, but you look back at it and they're actually very different.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Magical female characters.
Yeah, magic is where it ends.
That's really where it ends, because this was actually a very like empowering show for women. Which I thought was really cool. She was, like you said, the head of the household. She really was the one in control, but she was good. You know what I mean? She loved her husband. She loved her family.
Whatever she did was for the good of the situation.
But I think they played with the idea back then of the fact that like she had to be seen as this good little housewife, where the husband is, he's running the house, where, they very clearly made it obvious that she was the one in charge, but like they had to hide that fact.
Yeah.
So I think
because again, the times that was not well received.
But again, I think that's just a really cool direction to take it, because it is. I think it's again on the scale of wine to milk, we're probably closer to wine when it comes to aging of that show. Like again, that's a show that could be rebooted pretty much in its original form and do pretty good. I would think. Now, they did make a movie of that show back in the mid-2000s. Did you ever watch that? Do you remember it?
No, I don't. There's no recollection of
that. And that's funny to me because do you remember if you don't remember the movie? So the guy who played Darren, none other than Will Ferrell.
Oh.
And Nicole Kidman played Samantha.
How did I miss that?
It's not great. I'll say that.
That's fair.
But I mean, you like Will Ferrell, so I feel like
I watch anything.
You'd probably like it.
I have a problem.
Yeah.
I have a legitimate problem.
So it's all right, but I would totally watch a reboot of Bewitched, and I feel like a lot of shows have taken from that since then, as far as like the powerful female figure, whether they're magical or not. Good show.
I guess the magic had to kind of hide. Like it was like, well, it would be completely, like you can't imagine anything like that. She has to have magic
in order to take control of her house.
In order for her to be,
so I guess that's the part.
She has to have magic. So then you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that's maybe the part that either didn't age well or they just because you can't go too heavy-handed with that.
No,
type of
I
message.
know. I was just but it was just funny, like
Yeah,
you too can be if you are a magic person.
So yeah, Bewitched, fantastic show. I Love Lucy. Let's talk that because that to me is probably of all these shows we've talked about have the greatest legacy.
Oh yeah,
because it was one of the earlier sitcoms.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say a rom-com sitcom because it's not, but it was a husband and wife sitcom living in an apartment in New York City. That is a trope that has been around for, we're coming up on almost 70 years since that show. Well, I don't want to say 70 years. No, yeah. Gosh, that show came out in the late 40s.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're over 70 years since that show started. And there had been other shows, like The Honeymooners was another one.
Yeah.
I don't think that was on Nick at Night. It might have been, but I never watched it on Nick at Night.
It,
but same thing. You had these couples living in a New York City apartment. I think the difference is in Lucy's case. So let's just talk real quick about the plot of this one. So you have Lucy and Ricky Ricardo. They're living in an apartment in New York City. Ricky Ricardo, a very successful nightclub owner.
Mm-hmm.
The Babalu, I believe is what it was called. And Lucy was she was a stay-at-home wife, but she would always kind of get herself into hijinks either by herself or with her neighbor Ethel, who was married to Fred. The Munces, right? Isn't that what their last name was?
I don't remember.
I think the Munces. Anyway, they were an older couple, and they would hang out with Lucy and Ricky. They were at the start of the show. They were both childless couples.
Yeah,
and so they would always just kind of hang out. And it's funny because even though that show is so old, you can kind of relate to the fact that, before we had kids, we had couples friends.
Oh, yeah. We were just chill. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so we had our couples friends where they didn't have kids and we would just do our thing. And, there's always that point in your life where, one of your friend group, one of your people in your group, like has kids. And all of a sudden the dynamic changes.
Yeah.
And you either stick with them and hang out and just like, oh, well, there's kids now. Let's just make this work.
Yeah.
Which we have friends like that.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But there's also those others where you kind of just start growing apart just because of the way your life is progressing. And so we definitely have dealt with that as well. So, but I thought it was really cool that, you've got these couples friends that hang out and get into trouble. And
again, I feel like she was kind of Lucille Ball in general was just an amazing genius of a person.
Brilliant.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, this kind of goes down a little tangent, but interestingly enough, apparently she helped fund the Gene Roddenberry's vision for Star Trek.
Really?
So
I did not know that.
Without her money, so we can, if we do a Star Trek, it was for the original Star Trek,
okay,
not Next Gen, obviously, but she
that wouldn't exist without this apparently.
Exactly. So she was just
because she was like a bigwig at CBS.
Yeah,
she was very powerful, very influential, and. Yeah, that's really cool. I didn't know that, but that makes sense. That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. So, and again, in the shows, yes, it was the couples, but she was the main, it was I Love Lucy show. So she was the main attraction and she was always, it was just, she was goofy. It was comedy,
Yeah.
And
I think of all the shows we've talked about so far, this being the fourth one, I think this one to me has had the most impact on just sitcoms in general. You could talk about an I Love Lucy episode. Like there's so many famous I Love Lucy episodes, right?
Sure,
like what's one that you remember that is just so well known? Can you think of any?
Vita Vita Vegemin or
the
whatever?
Vita Vita Vegemin. And I just thought of two other ones that weren't that, literally just now. So like the Chocolate Factory one.
Oh yeah,
or the Candy
they're
Factory.
taking the candies off
She's
the
just shoving them in her mouth. The other one is where they're trying to make wine. Do you remember that one where they're stomping the grapes?
Yes.
And they're just doing the weird dance, like the river dance with the grapes.
That.
But that's the thing is there's so many. There's another one I remember where I think Ricky said, Lucy, I'm gonna cook dinner. That was a terrible impression. I'm sorry. I don't know why I just did that. I was really feeling it until I wasn't, and that's what came out. But I remember, I forget how the episode started, but long story short, Ricky basically said, I can do everything you can do, right? It was a whole gender swap thing where Lucy's like, Ricky, you couldn't run this house. And he's like, well, you couldn't run my club, Lucy. And so he decides, okay, well, I'm going to run the house then. So anyway, long story short, he decides to cook dinner.
Yeah.
And so I think he makes rice, right? He's making like a classic, Cuban meal. It's like, arroz con pollo, chicken and rice. And he says, okay, well, there's 4 of us eating, right? So what is that? 4 or 5? Let's do 5 cups of rice just to be safe.
Oh, jeez.
And so he's basically boiling rice and the whole kitchen's just filling up with rice. And Yeah, so that one sticks out for me. There's a few others. And there were spin-offs from that as well. Like the Lucy show. I guess I don't know if there were spin-offs or they just were different characters played by Lucille Ball who happened to be named Lucy. But did you watch any of the other like spin-off Lucy shows?
Not with much fidelity.
No. To me, I Live Lucy, though, is like a classic. Again, I think that's somewhere in the middle of Wine and Milk when it comes to aging, because in general, the humor is pretty harmless. I think there were definitely some kind of negative tropes of like, how husbands and wives should treat each other. But it was the times.
It's the times, and that's where, like he said, you couldn't run my club, because we were expected to just be at home making
rice,
the chicken and rice. Yeah.
So I think you'd have to tweak that a lot to remake it. I think there's too much there to go shot for shot remake. But and actually, did you see there was a movie that came out a couple years ago with Nicole Kidman as Lucille Ball? It was like a look behind the scenes.
Oh, I didn't see. Yeah, I didn't.
But you know
see
what I'm talking
about. But I know
about,
exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
well, because I think there was some drama because Deborah Messing was.
Well, Deborah Messing.
She wanted to be Lucille Ball.
I mean, she looks like her, and she acts. Deborah Messing. I would. I don't
know the reason behind the decision, but yeah.
But if they were to reboot it with her, like that would be the perfect casting for me. I don't know who would play Ricky Ricardo at this point, but definitely Deborah Messing. So I Love Lucy. 2 thumbs up from me. Fantastic show. What do we got left here? Let's talk about yours next. The one that I can honestly say this, I've never seen a single episode of in my entire life. Happy Days.
I loved that show. Happy Days.
Yeah.
The Fonz, Cunninghams, all them. I mean, it was basically like that 50s show. Kind of like the idea behind that 70s show, but
because it aired in the 70s, I think, right?
I guess, yeah.
But it took place in the 50s.
Yeah, it was definitely, it took place in the 50s, there was like sock hops and all that stuff, and they were the, the soda.
Well, that was the rage back then, because like you had, I think Grease, the movie Grease came out around the same time, and that took place in the 50s, but again, came out in the 70s. I wonder if that was just like an obsession they had back then.
I guess, and then that 70s show came out in the 90s.
Yeah, and now we've got that 90s show.
And now we've got
out.
that 90s show.
I think they're a little late on that. Well, no, I guess it's about 20 years later since that show aired. So yeah, no, it tracks.
Yeah. But no, I mean that's basically what it was. If you had named it that 50s show, you would know. It was really cool. They what I liked is Henry Winkler being the Fonz, the greaser, the super cool dude. And he would hang out with Charlie Cunningham, who was like this nerdy, goofy, gangly little kid. And so it was just shots of them in the house. I mean, the sets were very simple. You were either like, in the house or in the soda shop or, whatever. It was very simplistic. But, it dealt with different, growing up, family issues, stuff like that. Just kind of, the times, definitely.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure you know this, but this is actually something I do know about the show. But do you remember who played Arnold in Happy Days?
I might.
The soda shop owner?
I might, if I don't.
That was Pat Morita, also known as Mr. Miyagi.
Oh, snap.
From The Karate Kid.
Totally never made that connection.
So when they cast him in I read about this. When they cast him in The Karate Kid, they didn't think he could be a believable, dramatic presence because they're like, oh, that's just Arnold from Happy Days.
Oh, snap.
See? So you didn't know that.
I'm going to go back and go. Sorry.
It's funny. You mentioned.
Give me a second.
You mentioned the Fonz. And I've never seen the show, so I never saw Henry Winkler as like.
Henry?
Sorry, whatever.
Henry Winkler.
It's hard to say.
Henry Winkler.
Yeah, but you literally had to like enunciate every syllable to do that.
Okay.
Henry Winkler. I never saw him as cool.
Because, that's funny.
Yeah, I never thought of him as the cool guy because I didn't know who it was. The first movie I saw him in was Waterboy, where he played Coach Klein, the like droopy, terrible football
and the
coach.
opposite for me is like after that I was like, why is he being cast in all these like lame? Like
but that's the only Henry. Sorry, that's the only Henry Winkler that I know. I don't know cool Henry Winkler. So when I watched the movie Scream in the mid-90s, did you see the movie Scream?
Probably.
He played the principal in the first Scream movie. And there's a scene where he's in the restroom and he's like combing his hair in the mirror. And all of a sudden he does this like pose. And I didn't know what that was, but apparently that's what he would do as the Fonz. He would look at himself in the mirror.
Oh yeah, he'd be like, "Hey."
Yeah, so he does that in the movie Scream. I didn't know what that meant though. I had no idea, but apparently that was a callback to him as the Fonz.
Yes.
So
he would come in and he would take his comb and he would like comb his hair, and he would like, "Hey,"
Yeah. He was cool.
Yeah.
He is the reason that they invented the term jump the shark. Do you know that term?
Nope.
So jump the shark is when a show, or usually it's a show because it's the idea of it running for too long. So when a show is running too long, that they run out of ideas for their characters to do things. So there's apparently an episode later in the season where Fonzie on water skis jumps over a shark.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So, but they say that supposedly is when the show like peaked and then everything went downhill from there. So when you hear the term the show jumped the shark, that's when the show stopped being good and started kind of declining in quality.
Did not know that.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you Google it, like when did such and such, like for example, The Simpsons, that show's been going on forever. So, but like you say, when did The Simpsons jump the shark? And then, season 8 is when it started to really get terrible. So that's where that comes from. Also, do you remember the show actually there was a lot of shows that spun off of Happy Days. Do you remember the show that spun off Happy Days that starred Robin Williams?
No.
Mork and Mindy.
Yeah.
Yeah, where he was an alien.
Yeah.
Again, I've never seen the show and I know more about it than you. Why is that, Beth?
TV, I say all this, I did watch it, but TV and me, we didn't get too terribly much. So,
what were some other ones that spun off though? Like Laverne and Shirley, that spun off of this, right?
Did it?
I think so, right? Or was that a spin off of a different show?
Yeah, no.
Okay,
I don't think that.
Never mind.
Hold on.
You're gonna look it up.
Yeah.
All right, that's fine. On the fly.
Yeah.
But I've heard so many good things, and actually, I did see that it's streaming on, I think, one of my streaming platforms that I subscribe to.
Oh no, you were right. It was Happy Days.
I thought so. Right, and then there was others too, but I remember Laverne and Shirley ran for a very long time. So Happy Days was one of those kind of anchor shows that spun off into a whole, we'll call it the Happy Days television.
Joni Loves Chachi.
Okay.
We go.
Yep.
Nice. Yeah.
So there's some good ones.
Happy Days gang. I don't know what that is.
So what do you think about the concept of Happy Days? I mean, if they were to, let's put it like this, if they were to remake Happy Days and call it Happy Days, would you have it once again set in the 1950s, or would you have it set 20 years back, in which case it's basically that 90s show? Like, how would you remake Happy Days?
I mean, I don't think you can, because it's the whole purpose is it is a period piece. So I think it has been remade already in its own, in its own way. Like I mentioned, the 70s show and that 90s show.
Yeah.
You can't. That is something it's designed to. The whole purpose of it is that time period is a snapshot. So
like, would you watch it if they, again, going back to I think the first option there, if they remade Happy Days once again taking place in the 50s but being made now, would that appeal to you?
I mean, I liked these shows just in general. From kind of like you had mentioned, I think at the beginning, from nostalgic, not nostalgic because I never grew up, but like just kind of like seeing what it was like. You always, I don't know about you, but I always wondered, I knew what life was like when I was alive and when I was born,
right.
and how it is now. But even like our own kids last, what was it like in the 90s, but it was like a way for me to kind of see like where my parents came from, and what they saw and what their lives were like. Cause I mean, television is somewhat
Happy Days took place
pop,
before your parents were
well,
born.
yeah, but I'm just saying it is a pop culture.
Yeah.
And my parents, I mean, yes, my parents were, my grandparents rather, had my parents when they were fairly old. So I guess my grandparents would have been, they were like the 50s Beaver Cleaver type, whatever. But it was like, the ability to see what it was like, because it is a curiosity, like, and how things have changed from then to now. And so I felt like it was just a little bit of a
what are some shows you think, like, if we were to kind of set it to our kids, asking us, Mom and Dad, was this really what life was like? What are some shows they would watch to ask us if that's what it was like growing up?
Oh, wow. I don't have anything prepared for that. I don't know.
You can't think of it? So, like, the first one, and the reason I asked that is I actually did have one in my head, was like Full House.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
like if they were to ask me, Dad, was your life like Full House? Obviously, I mean, No.
You didn't have 3 dads?
No. But I think the whole idea of like how, how kids were parented, even in like Full House, it was corny, right? And
yeah. Well, like Kimmy was the latchkey kid,
right.
That had absolutely no parental supervision. So she just kind of showed up wherever she wanted
right.
to, and yeah, there were plenty of those.
Well, sure. But again, it was still not realistic as far as how situations would have been handled in real life. My point being, if you were to go back and ask your dad, like, Dad, what was your life like the Brady Bunch? It's like, no, of course it wasn't.
No, okay. So yeah, it's not.
I mean, as far as like the fashion or whatever,
I guess.
But like in general, like, that's like the whole June Cleaver.
Well, like hanging out at the soda shop and stuff like that actually did happen.
That's true. That's a good point.
Like we said with the gender roles of the time, that was a thing. They make that up,
Yeah.
So no, I mean, it's romanticized and Hollywoodized or whatever, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's the closest we'll get for not being there,
right.
I guess is what I'm saying.
I'm not going to go into detail on it, but actually that just brings up a point of one of my favorite movies of all time. I just rewatched it for like the 10th time the other day. Do you know what movie I'm talking about?
I wasn't paying attention to what you were watching. Sorry.
Pleasantville.
Oh,
do you remember that movie?
Yeah.
Tobey Maguire. You don't sound excited about that movie. You don't like that movie? That's a great movie.
I slept through it.
That's such a good movie. So how do you know you don't like it?
Because I fell asleep. Much like I did with all the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
God, you're terrible. Anyway,
open mouth snoring.
If you're listening to this and you've never seen the movie Pleasantville, starring Tobey Maguire and Reese Witherspoon, it is an absolute classic. It came out in the late 90s, just before Tobey Maguire became Spider-Man for realsies, apparently. And it's just great. I'm not going to give too much away, but if you like the old movies shows set in the 1950s, the Leave It to Beavers, the I Love Lucy's, all of those. If you like those shows, watch Pleasantville. It is terrific. All right. A couple more shows I want to talk about here. One, the Brady Bunch, which was that replaced My Happy Days. I love the Brady Bunch. It's a great show, right?
Yeah, I watched that too. Yeah.
Now, had you seen the show before you saw the 2 movies that came out in the 90s?
Yes.
Okay. See, I hadn't. I knew what it was, but I saw the movies first.
Oh,
and
okay.
it's because there were comedies. So you had the Brady Bunch movie and a Very Brady sequel, which were, I thought, hilarious. And honestly, even funnier after I went back and watched the Brady Bunch with all the things that they would kind of allude to and all the throwback or the callbacks, I guess, to the original show. So the Brady Bunch, again, for those who are keeping score at home, was a show about, I guess, a combined, what do you call that? There's a term for that.
Blended
a blended family.
Yeah,
that's what I'm talking about.
A blended family.
And there was actually a few shows like that back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Brady Bunch, and the other one that comes to mind is Cheaper by the Dozen. Do you remember that show? There was a movie, too.
I only saw the movie.
Okay, yeah. So I guess it was based off of a show. I never saw it either. But the Brady Bunch, I did see. And so you had Mike Brady with his sons. You had Greg, Bobby, and Peter. And then you had Carol. It was Brady when she got married. I cannot remember the name, her last name before she got married.
Yeah, I
don't know. Okay. But she had 3 daughters. And so you had Marcia, Jan, and then Cindy. And I always thought it was kind of funny that they would all change their last name to Brady as well. Usually the kids don't take the last name of their step parents.
You can, though. I mean, especially if the dad's out of the picture and you don't want anything to do with him.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, they never really explain what happened to him. So, he could have been like a terrible person, I guess.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with changing the last name.
So I think the first season of that show really dealt with a lot of like, how do you handle a blended family coming together? Because there was a lot of episodes around like fighting over things.
Oh, yeah.
But I remember the later episodes were just, kind of standard fare for, growing up in the 70s, like the whole fact that they had essentially 5 siblings really didn't factor in that I recall. Do you remember that being a big deal after like the first season or 2?
Yeah, no.
So they just it was like a normal kind of kids sitcom, and it was hokey. I don't know how hokey it was for the time, or if that was, but like looking back, obviously very corny, and the dialogue was, pretty silly, and but
I liked Alice.
What? Alice? Oh, Alice the housekeeper. She was great, man.
She was bomb.
Yeah, no, shout out to Alice. She actually just passed away not too long ago.
Oh,
I think.
Damn.
Yeah, no, she was was not as old as she was made to look in the show.
No.
Anne. What was her name? I'm not going to look it up, but Anne something.
We're really bad with names today. We have no idea. We're like, I don't even know.
I should have wrote this stuff down, but I didn't. But Did you have a favorite Brady kid? I feel like people like
I loved Cindy. I don't know
Yeah.
why. I really did, because she was just that cute, tiny little. She had these little ringlet curls.
Yep.
She always got what she wanted.
Yeah.
Because she was just
the
the
baby.
adorable little baby.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I kind of liked Cindy.
I think I'm going to go with Bobby. He was the middle Brady boy.
Yeah.
Because he was always kind of getting into trouble and doing, especially as he got older. Like, he was the middle child, and he basically acted out because of that. But it wasn't anything crazy, because it was the Brady Bunch. But I remember I loved Florence Henderson. Like, I wanted her to be my mom back then. She was just great, because she was, because, we only had 4 kids in my house growing up, but you had a mom that was managing a very large household.
Mhm.
Granted, she had a maid to help her, but you had a mom that was kind of handling things, and she was just so good. And her and her husband always were on the same page and got along so well. So it was kind of that ideal family, but at the same time being a blended family. So it wasn't a traditional family, but they still came together as a family in every episode, and I thought it was really cool. And then I saw the movies again after I watched the show. Like I said,
Yeah.
Hilarious, like even better.
I haven't seen them, so
You've never seen them?
I guess I probably have. I just don't remember them. They didn't stick with me.
Oh, they're true.
I'm sure I saw them. I feel like I would.
I feel like if you watch them again now as an adult, that they've they hold up.
Oh yeah.
I'd say we'd have to.
But the one thing that is just going back to it that I don't know, because again I was a child and I'm thinking about it now as an adult, is that that is like you did say, cheaper by the dozen, the blended family, but like that is, was that the first time, like in the 70s, that kind of stuff was shown? Because I know, again, there was just a very like,
as far as like being reflected of the time. I mean, because obviously they existed in real life.
But that wasn't. I mean, divorce and things like that were actually not very.
Yeah, I mean, like
still
10
were
years
not very
prior.
common.
Yeah.
And so I find that just interesting from that perspective of just like, like, was that the first time they showed? I mean, I honestly don't know the answer to that question, but like, was that the first time? When did that kind of stuff start?
Yeah, I don't know.
Showing, because then you have something like, I'm thinking about like Modern Family, that show Modern Family,
Mhm.
And that's
It's a blended
at this
family.
point, well, yeah, but and at this point, that's even relatively.
I mean, that
old.
shows.
Was that early 2000?
It was like mid 2000s that came out.
I don't know, but anyway, so it's just I don't know, something I wonder.
I think you're right though. It might have been kind of one of the pioneers of a non-traditional family. That's functional. I think that's the big thing too, because it's the non-traditional family, sure, but can they get along and act as a family? And I think this was the first show.
I don't even think they would have shown a dysfunctional thing on TV. I feel like television back in the day, it was very like ABC, like you did these things.
I think in the 60s and 70s, you're right. I think as we get toward like the late 70s and
that's what I'm saying.
80s,
like, so was it like more of that revolution? Like, oh, we're gonna
I think you wouldn't have a lot of the controversial shows, not even controversial, but a lot of the, kind of the family conflicts you'd see in later sitcoms without having the Brady Bunch kind of set things up as like, hey, look at this perfect family, even though we've got all these crazy things going on and there's like 10 of us in this house.
Right. Yeah. I can't even imagine the bathroom situation, but yeah.
Yeah, because they only ever showed one bathroom.
Right. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Sitting there like, dang.
Good show. Love that show. Are there any other shows that you remember? Because I know I only asked you to give me 5.
The other one that popped up, and actually I just remembered it, was Mr. Ed.
Oh, Mr. Ed with the horse.
Ed.
Did you like that show?
I just liked the horse.
Yeah.
It was cute. I loved horses. I was a little girl. I loved horses.
So,
they put peanut butter.
That's what I was going to say.
Yep,
That's the
they
one
put
thing.
Peanut butter, and he would just because it was actually probably pretty freaking torturous.
For the horse?
No, I mean it was tasty.
Well,
I'm sure.
Oh, the peanut butter was.
But
yeah.
he's sitting there he's literally just trying to get peanut butter out of his freaking mouth the whole time.
Yeah.
And you're like, they're talking to him, and this poor horse is like, Jesus.
Yeah. No, like I always, to me, like Mr. Ed and Lassie are like 2 shows.
Oh shoot, Lassie!
And I never watched Lassie, so I don't.
Man.
Do you have memories from Lassie?
I loved I wanted a shelter. What was it? It was a sheepdog.
It was either a collie. It was a border collie or something.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Whatever the collie. Anyway, loved that. Lassie
I never
always
watched
saved
Lassie.
the day.
Yeah. No.
I wanted a Lassie.
Yeah. My grandparents had a Lassie. It was a boy dog. His name was Tucker, and he was a dick. Like, he's straight up dick. So I
That's
don't.
fair. Well, I wasn't allowed to have long-haired dogs because I didn't want to deal with that. So I got a short-haired pointer, and that was my Lassie.
You know, it's funny because we have a short-haired dog, and he sheds more than any other long-haired dog I've ever had in my life.
Well, he sheds more than any dog I've ever had, period.
Yeah,
So I don't know what his problem is.
All right, so we're gonna let's round out then the trifecta of animal-based sitcoms. So you had Mr. Ed, you had Lassie, and you had all of which were on Nick and Nite, by the way, and you had Flipper.
Oh, shoot.
See?
Dang,
there's another Nick and
just
Nite show.
Pulling these out of my brain.
I know. So
Flipper.
I didn't watch
Aw.
Flipper either, though. So did
It was
you
a
watch Flipper?
dolphin. Every little girl loves dolphins.
Really? I thought it was horses that y'all liked.
And horses. Lisa Frank capitalized on all that shit when we were kids. She was like, I'm going to make dolphin poster folders. I'm going to make horsey folders.
I guess.
She just capitalized on all that shit. But anyway, no, it was dolphin. It was, of course, it was a dolphin.
Yeah.
It was a sweet, cute little rescue-y dolphin that just saved the day.
Oh boy, I just never. I watched the movie that came out with Elijah Wood in like the mid '90s. It was good. I liked it. I don't know if I'd watch the old show though. No, the original.
Show.
No, no,
it was good, but I don't think I'd watch it again. No.
Yeah, no. So there's one other show I want to mention as kind of an honorable mention here because it came out a little later in kind of our viewing cycle. So, I mean, and when it came out on Nick at Nite, it wasn't really that old at the time, but the Wonder Years.
Oh, yeah. That's another, I feel like that was another, like, that 70s show period piece type situation.
It was kind of like if you had, like that 70s show or Happy Days, but like as a drama. Because that's what it was.
More dramatic. Yeah, it wasn't as funny. Yeah, that's fair. But
it was still a very good show, though.
Yeah.
Like one of my favorites. I've rewatched it a couple times. And I think the first time I saw an episode of it was on the Wonder Years because it was on as a kid. I forget what channel it originally came on. I just didn't care for it as a kid. It just didn't interest me. But then, like by the time it came on Nick at Nite in the early 2000s, it was 10 or 15 years old at that point. So it wasn't as old as some of the other shows were. But I was old enough to appreciate kind of the messaging behind it, right? Because I think the boy in the show was like 12 or 13, Kevin. So
yeah.
Which is around the age I was when I first saw it. And I said, this is really good. And so I remember I made a point to go back and rewatch it like in my 20s. It's such a good show. It holds up very well.
I should probably. I haven't watched it since I was a kid.
Well, they remade it, I guess, just like a couple years ago, or like it's called The Wonder Years, but it's not like an exact remake. Like it's a different family dealing with different issues, but still in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I might check it out.
Sounds good. That's fair.
Oh man. Well, listen, before we wrap up on Nick at Nite as well as Nickelodeon for the month of January, any other things you want to cover with regard to these old shows?
I mean, no, I think we pretty much covered it. It was just it was cool. It was cool. It was one time my parents didn't really watch. I mean, I would have cartoons on and they would like breeze through the living room or whatever on their way to do something in the house, but it was the one time where they would actually just like come sit and watch. Like they weren't going to sit there and watch cartoons with me necessarily.
Yeah.
But if I had that on, it was cool because everybody could, sit down and get some enjoyment.
Because it was shows they watched as kids.
Yeah. So they knew, they were like, oh, this part's funny or, and so they would sit and actually take a minute and watch with us, So I think that was kind of cool where it was trying to, it was Nickelodeon's way of trying to connect the generations through its programming, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, for the most part, my parents didn't really care for what else was coming through the tube, the rest of the times of the day. So,
it's funny too, because we do that with our kids now, though. We'll find usually it is cartoons because we did watch those as kids mostly. But you had like all the Nicktoons that are streaming right now. We'll put on an episode of like Rugrats or Real Monsters, and like they're into it.
They like it, yeah.
And I'm into it because it is. I'm like, oh, I remember this episode. You're gonna love this part. I know the kids are gonna laugh at this scene. So we're doing that now, and I think that's really cool. So yeah, that was really our hats off to Nickelodeon for being able to think that far ahead of like, this is a programming block that parents and kids can watch together for different reasons, for nostalgia, but also for, something new for the kids that's still enjoyable.
Yeah. And family friendly and all that stuff. Yeah. Because none of that was,
Nope. No, I mean, I feel like some of the shows that came out later in their life cycle, like probably were more geared towards like an adult crowd or like a teenage crowd. I go back to like Friends. Friends is on Nick at Night. I wouldn't show our kids Friends.
Oh yeah, no.
You know what I mean?
I'm talking about the 50s, like
yeah, they were all
wholesome stuff,
super safe. Yeah.
There was nothing really too crazy that was happening in those. So everybody could watch it, everybody could enjoy it, and it was something that I thought.
I didn't even mention this, but you may not remember this either, but the whole Nick at Night concept actually spun off an entire channel called TV Land.
Yes, I do remember TV Land.
So it really was so revolutionary. It was taking these old shows, it was making them new again, and proving that there's still an audience for them. Even now, I think TV Land's probably on cable somewhere at this point, or maybe it's called something else now.
Yeah, we haven't had cable for 10 years, so I have no flipping idea.
Oh, man. Well, listen, man, this was fun. This was a good kind of wrap up for this month here. We as I mentioned, we covered Nickelodeon all month long. So if you want to hear more about how we kind of go through Nickelodeon throughout the years in the 90s, listen back to the last few episodes. The entire month, we've talked all about Nickelodeon, and we're wrapping things up here with Nick at Night. And Beth, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I do want to tell you this. I don't want to have your ego get too big, but you have gotten a lot of compliments on the shows that you've come on so far for me. So
shucks.
No,
stop.
They say, she's got a natural radio voice. And I say, yeah, it's pretty spectacular.
Wow.
All right, don't get weird. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. Hey, real quick also, if you like this show, tell a friend. Spreading spreading word of mouth. That's not the right. I just screwed that up. Spreading the word of mouth, that's how this show is going to grow. So if you know somebody else that maybe grew up in the mid 90s, the early 2000s, and can appreciate some of the stuff we're talking about. I have heard this actually quite a bit. This was a big piece of feedback I got, was that people are saying, dude, you've awakened memories in my head that I forgot I had from 25 years ago. And that is exactly what this show is about. I want to tell stories with these topics as kind of anchors. So we've been talking about these old shows, but we've also been talking about our experiences with them growing up, and maybe you've had those same experiences as well. So that is what Generation S is all about. So if you like the show, let people know. Make sure you're checking us out on all the socials as well. We try to post content somewhat regularly over on YouTube. I try to remember to post things on our Facebook page, but go ahead and give that a like as well. Just search for Generation S Podcast. We are also on TikTok. I'm still figuring out how to be a proper TikToker, but there it is. And man, check it all out. And we'll be back next week with a brand new episode of Generation S. And until then, we will talk to you soon.
Goodbye.